All right. So if you weren't in our class last time, then you don't know how I kind of like to start my classes. I have this question up on the board, or at least this thought-provoking thought, to kind of get the discussion rolling and kind of get us going in the direction that we're headed. So let me ask you, tell me about a time when you lost something that was extremely valuable. Anyone got a good story about losing something really valuable? Yes, sir? All right. Can anyone top 2 5-year-olds? Anyone got 3 5-year-olds? A 13-year-old? So one 13-year-old, is that more or less than 2 5-year-olds?
Metro, she stepped off the platform, doors closed, we take off.
No! That's terrifying.
Yes, so she's calling her mom and saying,
And that's how Nana loses babysitting privileges. What you got? Yes, sir.
I have the reciprocal of that. I lost my mom at Walmart, and it was like 5 years old, and I couldn't find her, so I had to go to an assistant, and like she did the whole voiceover thing to the whole store. My mom was like just around the corner. I just didn't see her.
How is that your fault?
Find her. I didn't know where she was.
So she knew where you were, but you didn't know where she... I understand. Very good. So one time I lost my car. I got home really late one night, and one of my friends from school was walking around the neighborhood, and so when I parked my car and I locked it, I put the keys on top, and I went to go talk to my friend, and then after about an hour or so talking to them, I went back inside, I went to bed, totally forgot about it. So I wake up the next morning, I'm eating breakfast, and my mom goes, "Jonathan, where is your car?" And I said, "It's in the driveway. I pulled in last night. It's parked where it always is." She said, "It's not there. It's gone." And so I go outside and I realize I put my keys on top of the car and my car is absolutely, completely gone. So we start freaking out. I've lost my car. My car's been stolen, which in Lumberton, Texas is not something that happens very often. But I was totally scared about it. She let me worry about that for about 5 minutes. And then she said, "By the way, I took your keys off your car. I got in your car. I drove it 3 houses down and parked it." So that was not very cool. But I did have that sense for 5 minutes of losing something really, really valuable, something extremely important. One of the things that I want you to appreciate, that we ought to appreciate, is that the story of mankind is a story of losing something extremely valuable. And so Genesis begins in chapters 1 and 2 by telling us everything that God gave to us, right? He gave us this world, He gave us all the creatures and all the food and all the good stuff in this world. And more importantly than everything else, He gave us a relationship with Him. He created us and He gave us a relationship where we got to enjoy one another and live together. But what happens when we get into Genesis 3 is we learn very quickly about how we lost all the wonderful things that God gave us. And I want you to appreciate mainly how this sense of loss, it sets the tone for the rest of the Bible. Because I want you to know that even though we weren't there in the beginning, and even though none of us really know what it feels like to have that perfect union with God, there is a sense in which, because of how we were created, all of us live with that feeling of loss. All of us live with that sense that we don't have what we ought to have. Because in the beginning, when we were created with the ideal, with the intention that we would be able to have unity with God. And since the Garden of Eden, all of us have lost that, which leaves a hole in every single one of our hearts. So the story of Genesis, the story of the Bible, the story of mankind is a story of loss, and ultimately how God sent Jesus to help us recover what we lost in the Garden of Eden. So tonight we're going to be in Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. If you weren't here in our last class, then I'm going to let you know we're reading from the CSB. That's a Christian Standard Bible. It's not quite like the NLT. It's a much more trustworthy translation than that, but it does say things in an Old Testament way that's a lot more understandable, and so I like to use this translation for our New Testament study. We're going to begin in Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. We're going to go verses 1 through 6. And I promise you, before we read this, we're not going to reinvent the wheel here. I know that you know the serpent came along, and I know that you know he was a bad guy. So we're not going to, do any revelations like that tonight. But there are some important things to talk about, and we'll discuss those. So who wants to get Genesis 3, verses 1 through 6? All right. So, as we said last class, we need to remember who the original audience of the book of Genesis was, right? And so remember that somebody like Abraham, somebody like Adam and Eve, they never got to read the book of Genesis. They don't understand what's going on here. The original audience for the book of Genesis was who? The Israelites, right? Because Moses wrote the book of Genesis along with the other 4 books that come with the Torah. So I wonder, when we read all of this and when we look at all of this, since we know this is not just a history lesson about, hey, here's what happened with the fall of mankind. This is a carefully curated story that has been recorded for us that we're intended to learn from, that the Israelites were supposed to learn from. So what in there sticks out to you? Why would God say, I want Israel, I want Christians to have this story? What sticks out? What do you learn? Yes, sir.
When I was rereading this, I noticed that Eve adds on to what God commanded us. God commanded us that you shall not eat of it. That was it. But Eve said you shall not touch it. And that I just kind of was glaring to me the fact that even though you're trying to make precautions with it, it can be ways to do one.
Okay, yeah, so sometimes we have that temptation to add on to what God says. Certainly the Pharisees could have benefited from learning that lesson. Yes, sir? We learn about our adversary, okay? So we see him right off the bat, right here in the beginning. He's the cause of all the corruption in the world, all the perversion in the world, okay? What else? Yes, sir?
We also see that God is exerting His right to make laws.
Yeah, so God is unapologetically asserting His authority. And I like that, because when I assert my authority, I always do it apologetically. But God doesn't do that. He has a right to tell them what to do, and so He makes that command without apology. And as we talked about last time, He makes that command for their good, right? Sometimes we know that, well, not sometimes. Let me redo that sentence. God always is the only one who blesses mankind. But sometimes His blessings come in the form of restrictions, right? Which is why He said, I don't want you to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Even though that was a restriction, it held them back from knowing some things about good and evil. That was intended for their good. We need to remember that. Yes? Yeah, we see all of that in there, don't we? I'm going to get to that in just one second. You got me. But good job, good job. You're on the right track. Yes, ma'am, then yes, ma'am. Okay. That's right. And it's so funny these days in this psychological society. We pretend so much that we don't have choices, right? You made me do that, or I did this because, this is how I was born, or this is, just the way I was created. But from the beginning, it makes it very clear. This is all about our choices, all about what we choose. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, that's another important thing to remember. Also, maybe stepping too far out on this branch, that's important for the Israelites, isn't it? Because think about one of their biggest temptations when they get to the promised land is what? Intermarriage, right? And how their wives can draw their hearts away and things like that. That can happen to Christians too. So there's an important lesson there. Yes, sir. I've got way too many hands.
I don't know that same thing. I see a lack of leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. Maybe I'm off base saying this. I feel like people in our society in this decade, in this century, are saying, now we've come to this point in the history of the world where You know, we have this problem with feminism and this problem with male leadership, and like it's some kind of new thing. And it's always been there. This has always been the problem. We actually learned that in the story later on. This is something that we've always struggled with, not just our modern society. Yes, sir.
There's a big lesson. God's ways are not our ways in this, because the promise that God made is He will surely die. But in the eyes of Adam and Eve, and in the words of the promise of the serpent, is He won't die. And they don't end up dying in the sense that they don't believe it. And it's the same for us, and it's the same for the children of Israel. There's many of God's promises that have a greater depth that goes beyond just our lifetime, our short number of years on this earth, and we don't grasp the depth of understanding until we see the greater picture, until we see sometimes God's prophecies.
Yeah. So understand that when God gives a command, there's usually a whole lot more depth to it than we see from our perspective. All right. We are 14 minutes in. I've got time for your comment.
That's a question. So in verse 1 of mine, it says, the serpent was more sharp than any wild animal, for us it says animal of the field.
Yikes.
Which made me think, the field is not the garden. And so is this a precursor to, and also wild animals later in the Bible are also, and the wilderness is a whole different thing. Is this a precursor or an introduction to the cosmic battle going on where we have these other outsiders coming in, walk away from God, what is rightfully his? I just never noticed. It says wild animals, animals of the field. And the field is part of the curse that's coming up in 20 verses or so.
Yeah.
This animal comes before they're going.
That is a really great question, and I would direct it to the Bible department because that is way, way out of my depth. But it is a wonderful question, and
It's never caught my eye.
yeah, that's very interesting.
What does your version say?
Mine says the serpent was more cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord God had made. So I'm not quite sure. I'd have to do study on that, but that is a wonderful question. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Okay, the field was there in the original language. I'm gonna have to beg off on that. I'm not quite sure. I'm sorry about that. So the couple of things that I wanted to emphasize here in these first couple of verses. The first one that I wanted to say is that here in these verses we meet our common enemy. We see him from the very beginning. It is neat to consider, though, that just based on what we hear, there isn't much about the serpent that you would actually know. We read that as Christians and we say, oh, the serpent in the garden tempting, who's that? It's Satan. How much do you really know about Satan when you only have the first 5 books of the Bible, though? Not much at all. I mean, I don't know what else you would learn about Satan from the first 5 books of the Bible. You certainly don't know all that New Testament stuff that we learn about him. And so it's interesting to think that this serpent character would have been very mysterious to them. Just like the idea of Christ coming, and the one who's going to bruise the head of the serpent would have been very mysterious and would have contained a lot of significance, but they would have known a lot of the answers to that. Same is true with Satan, our adversary. There isn't a lot of information given to us about him. And so it's interesting to consider that not only with Christ, but also with the devil, we're learning more, and the picture becomes clearer as we make our way through the Bible. But here in the beginning, we don't know very much. I think another interesting thing to point out here is that we see something about the way the devil works his timing. When does the devil show up in the Bible? Genesis 3. But what's just happened? He shows up right after what? Okay, right after God gives us commandments. That's true. I was thinking a different thing, though. Same point, same time. But what has God just done? He's just created man and woman. He's just finished his creation. And what did he declare it? He said, this is very good. And then, boom, here's the devil. It seems to me that's the way the devil works. And that's the way he always shows up. When God says something is good, when God blesses something, that's when the devil looks at it and says, I want to see if I can mess this thing up. Can I show you a parallel to that? You'll go to Matthew chapter 3. Matthew chapter 3 really quickly. I want to show you how this works in the New Testament. I think that this is kind of a parallel to what happens here in the garden. So in Matthew chapter 3, you'll remember that we have recorded for us the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist. And remember how the baptism of Jesus ends, right? We see verse 16, Matthew chapter 3, when Jesus was baptized, he went up immediately from the water. The heavens suddenly opened for him, and he saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and coming down on him. And a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased." Chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Isn't that interesting? Now, another cool thing about the baptism of Jesus is that, while we may not realize this all the time, if you read the Gospel of John carefully, then it becomes very clear that not even John the Baptist knows who Jesus is until he baptizes him. If you read John 1 carefully, then you understand that the Lord, the Spirit, told John, "I want you to baptize people, and when you see the dove descending on him and staying on him, then you'll know that's the Anointed One." So after Jesus is baptized, he comes up from the water, and what? He sees the dove descend, and that's when John the Baptist knows, oh, this is Jesus. And that's when John the Baptist starts telling everybody, hey, that's the Lamb of God who's come to take away the sins of the world. And so it's not too big of a leap to assume that Satan didn't know who Jesus was until then either. And it's only here, after Jesus is baptized, that he realizes who Jesus is, what his identity is, and that's why he comes to him to try to ruin this perfect man that God has brought into the world. Because that's what Satan does. When God makes something good, he immediately sets about to ruin the thing that God made good. Does that have any practical application to your life? No? Yes. I think so. I think so. And in so many different venues, right? There are good things that God has given us that, we get to enjoy. Marriage is something that God says, that's good. Marriage between a man and a woman, that's good. He blesses that. He looks kindly upon that. That's good for us. It's good for a man to find a wife. But as soon as you get married, what's the devil want to do? He wants to make that crooked. He wants to twist that. He wants to turn it into something bad. Same thing goes with the church. When a church is established in a place, you think God looks at that and says, that's good? Absolutely. But as soon as this good thing happens, what does he want to do? He wants to twist it and turn it and pervert it and make it messed up. So understand that's what Satan does. He takes these beautiful things and he makes them bad. Or at least he tries to. As Miss Debbie pointed out, the third thing that I want to show you is that we also see the modus operandi of the devil. And so you'll remember in Matthew chapter 4 that there are three ways that the devil tempts Jesus. How does he tempt him? Yeah, turn these stones into bread, which is what? Lust of the flesh. Throw yourself down from the temple, and surely the angels will catch you. What is that? Wait. The boastful pride of life, yes. It's backwards from what it is in John. That's what threw me off. When I taught this in the college class, I did the same thing. Yes, boastful pride of life, and then what's the third one? Kingdoms of the world. He showed him all the kingdoms of the world, the lust of the eyes. Now, why does Eve eat the fruit in Genesis 3? What's she say? It's good for food. What's that? Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes. It's a delight to the eyes. What's that? That's the lust of the eyes. It's desirable to make one wise. And then what's Satan say when she's not quite sure about eating it? You won't die. What's that? It's the boastful pride of life. That idea that I'm going to keep living and nothing's going to keep that from happening. I'm not going to die. And so we see that that's how the devil always gets us. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, boastful pride of life. That's how he tries to pervert the things that God makes good. To another point that someone made, both in the book of Genesis and in Matthew chapter 4, when he tempts Jesus, what is one way that he tries to tempt him? Aside from the things that he offers him, what is one way that he tries to convince him to do these things? Andy? By twisting God's commands, by misrepresenting what God has said, what God has promised, and what his laws are. And so we would be well off to recognize that the better we know our Bible, the safer we are, because that's what Satan is always trying to do. He's not averse to the Bible. He loves the Bible. so long as you don't know the Bible well enough so it can trick you and deceive you about what the Bible is actually saying. It's always good for us to keep an open mind and an open heart and keep our eyes and our nose in the book. Okay, so after all of this temptation, after their sin, we see the results of that beginning in verse 7. Immediately. It says, "Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they knew they were naked. So they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze, and they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden. So the Lord called out to the man and said to him, 'Where are you?' And he said, 'I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid.' Then he asked, 'Who told you that you were naked? Did you eat from the tree that I commanded you not to eat from?' The man replied, 'The woman you gave to be with me, she gave me some fruit from the tree, and I ate.' So the Lord asked the woman, 'What have you done?' And the woman said, 'The serpent deceived me, and I ate.' So the Lord God said to the serpent, 'Because you have done this, you are cursed more than any livestock and more than any wild animal. You will move on your belly and eat dust all the days of your life. I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike you on your head, and you will strike his heel.' He said to the woman, 'I will intensify your labor pains, and you will bear children with painful effort. Your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you.' And he said to the man, 'Because you listened to your wife and ate from the tree about which I commanded you, do not eat from it. The ground is cursed because of you. You will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. You will eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you are taken from it, for you are dust, and you will return to dust.'" And so what I want you to appreciate is that everything that happens after verse 6 immediately is about ruin and loss. It does not take very long at all. It takes no time at all for them to see that the result of their sin is destruction. And so there are several things that are destroyed. What would you say, according to what we just read, right after they commit this sin, what have they destroyed? What have they ruined?
Like the innocent child that goes from unawareness to sin, and you see them change because they're aware. So they go from being a child to
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the first thing I wrote down, verse 3 and verse 7, the eyes of them were opened, right? Their innocence is ruined, which is exactly what God did not want to happen. That's why he told them not to eat from the fruit of the tree. So it's interesting to consider. I'm going to get to trust in a second. But it is interesting to consider, because it's the first thing that was in my notes. It is interesting to consider that Satan said something. Was Satan right about what he said? Did he tell them the truth? Oh man, all kinds of answers. Everyone but no. So it is interesting because he is right in a sense, right? They did become like God, and they did know good and evil. But what did Eve not know? Yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that. He said, this is what you're going to have, and that's what she had. He just didn't tell her, but you really don't want that because that's not going to be a lot of fun. And so remember that like all of Satan's deceptions, we learn with this deception that his promises come true. They only come true in the worst possible form. And so usually that's what Satan does. He doesn't outright lie, although he can. But what he does is he twists it, he misrepresents it, he deceives, he leaves details out. And that is important to remember when we battle him with our own temptations. Well, yeah, and that's part of it too, right? You know, do this, you're going to enjoy it for 2 seconds. You know, that's how it works. So understand that Eve wanted to be free from her innocence, but her innocence was really a blessing. And so their innocence was ruined. The knowledge of good and evil was a weight that God never intended for us to bear. That's interesting, isn't it? That the things you know about what's right and wrong, all the things that you know about all the different wicked ways that you could live, this is a weight, an understanding that God never wanted you to have. I don't understand exactly how all that works theologically and how he's okay with us not knowing what evil is, but it is true. He did not want us to know this. It was a weight that was too heavy. He did not want us to bear, that we still live with because of their choice back then. All right, you said trust. Their trust was ruined. How so? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And they lose something else in that too, don't they? They lose their sense of self-confidence and self-esteem. I hate to use that term because I don't think self-esteem is a very theologically strong term, but that's really what happens. They hide themselves because of what? What are they feeling? Feeling guilt and shame. That's another thing that we have to appreciate. Just like God did not want us to have the knowledge of good and evil, God never intended for you to feel guilt and shame. That feeling that you feel, and all of us feel it, right? All of us have that thing where if you closed your eyes and you thought for 5 seconds and I told you, remember the worst thing you've ever done. We all have that thing that still makes us red in the face because we know we did something that was just truly awful. And we feel that shame and that guilt, which I don't know, guys. I don't know if there's a worse feeling in the world than that. We were never supposed to feel that. And yet this is something that we feel all the time. Because in the garden, when we lost our relationship with God, we started to begin to experience guilt and shame. When we were supposed to be full of confidence and self-esteem with that good relationship with God, that was ruined in the garden. The third, we see, of course, the consequences from their sin come later, and he begins talking about that. We see that their world was ruined. What punishments are given to Adam and Eve? All right. Pain in childbirth. Pain in childbirth. And so understand that something that was supposed to be very natural for Eve, and it seems like something that was supposed to come with very minimal pain or maybe even no pain at all, now this is something that comes with intense pain. Something natural is now something that is very painful. And that's a terrible curse. What else? Weeds. Have you been gardening recently? But that's absolutely true. Understand that as well. That here's Adam, his natural mission given to him in chapter 1 or 2, maybe both. Off the top of my head, I can't remember. What's his natural mission? What's his job? To tend the garden, to take care of it, right? That's why he was placed in the garden. And now his natural mission, which should have been very easy, even though it was still work, it should not have come with that much difficulty, but now this is going to be cursed with difficulty. So Eve's natural function is cursed with pain and difficulty. Adam's natural function is cursed with difficulty as well, and pain, because thorns do poke you. What else? That's right. We're going to get to that. You're exactly right, but I'm not there yet, but that's the main thing, the most important thing. I want you to appreciate what else is said to Eve. He says in verse 16, I will intensify your labor pains, you will bear children with painful effort, then your desire will be for your husband, yet he will rule over you. And so what I want you to appreciate is that it seems like God is saying that Eve's natural position, that the natural functioning of their relationship together is now going to be cursed with difficulty, right? And it seems like what is being said is that a woman, obviously, is supposed to be submissive to her husband. She is supposed to take a submissive role. He is supposed to lead the household. She is supposed to submit to her husband. And now, as a result of this, what's going to happen? She is going to desire that right to rule. And so we might go so far as to say that this is a desire, this was a temptation that women were not supposed to feel. This was a problem that was not supposed to exist in a relationship between a man and a woman, but now because they live in a fallen world, this natural functioning of the marriage relationship becomes more difficult. We don't like the positions that we're in. So, and of course, at the end of it, you see in verse 19, for you are dust, and you will return to dust. And so ultimately their natural bodies will experience the most unnatural of things, which is death. We say death is natural. Death is not natural. Again, like all these other things, it's not something that we were ever meant to experience. Now, as Sister Salzer made her point, the fourth thing that's ruined is their relationship with God in Jesus and the Holy Spirit. They're expelled from the presence of God, and they're forced to live at a distance from Him. We're going to read that in just a second. I forgot to ask, are there any thoughts thoughts or comments about all of the consequences and the curses?
Actually, I have a question for the biology professor. Is human being the only kind of, is human being the only animal that experience pain in birth? It's not other animals. Well, not animals, but other animals, right? Animals experience pain in birth. Probably yes.
Yeah.
So why would they punish the punish or without labor? Is that related to humans?
Yeah, I don't know if we know the answer to that. But it's certainly possible that as a result of us living in a fallen world, then the creatures are part of a fallen world as well. And so maybe, but I'm not sure there's a clear answer on that.
They're also punished in the flood for being violent. It's kind of the same question on the other side. Like, why are they being animals?
Yeah. Just put that down in your little pocket notebook of questions to ask when you get to heaven. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I guess so. That's true. I was going to get there eventually. We'll get there in a minute. Yeah.
I was going to go back to the first one. I
I
don't know anything about biology.
don't either.
What struck me about reading back through this was I've never really understood what Satan's motive was, and then you get through like what does he really gain? And that he doesn't really gain any power, and then God curses him. I can't imagine that Satan would have thought he would have gotten away with that probably. But it kind of gives the idea that Satan's one goal is to destroy that God creates.
Yeah, absolutely. He's bent on our destruction and bent on everything against God. And that's hard to conceive, you know. We can't really put ourselves in those shoes, but that's a pretty big testament to his evilness. Yes.
It starts a motif throughout the Bible where the ones who come second dominate the firstborns, and the firstborns actually kind of kick against that. So it's kind of setting up this whole, you see with Jacob and Esau, a lot of the brothers and stuff. So,
Yeah, that's exactly. Rachel and Leah as well, right?
but maybe you just meant he was in the garden.
That's an important comment. Thank you. That's very good. Yes, sir, Andy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Well, and that's one of two examples of, you know, Jesus that we see in here, right? The first one, we see his first prophecy about the one who's going to strike Satan on the head. But then we also see that idea of Jesus there in verse 21, where an animal was killed in order to provide a covering from them. And that harkens forward to Galatians 3, right? For all of you who have been baptized into Christ have been clothed with Christ, right? And so we're clothed with his righteousness, just as they were clothed with the animal that was killed to provide them a covering. I got to move on. I'm sorry, guys, unless somebody really feels very strongly about their comment. You can say yes. No, you can't. Verse 22. The Lord God said, "Since the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, he must not reach out, take from the tree of life, eat, and live forever." So the Lord God sent him away from the Garden of Eden to work the ground from which he was taken. He drove the man out and stationed the cherubim and the flaming, whirling sword east of the Garden of Eden to guard the way to the tree of life. And so we see that Adam and Eve are expelled from the presence of God. They are forced to live at a distance from him. And that is something that all of us struggle with each and every day. All of us living here in this broken world, a world of ruin and loss, we experience that loss of relationship, and we feel that. So the world that Adam and Eve left behind is not the world that you were meant to inhabit. And I hope you see that in what we're talking about in all these different things. That our relationship was ruined, that we were never supposed to lose, and the things that we have to do, childbirth and work in the garden, it's stuff that's been cursed with difficulty that we weren't supposed to experience. Losing our innocence and living with the knowledge of sin and evil is not something that we were supposed to experience. We need to remember that while this world does experience the grace of God in so many different ways, it is not the existence that we were meant to live. Like we said at the beginning, even though we were not there in the garden, we all live with that sense of loss. That's what the story of the Bible is about. That we've lost something as mankind, and we need the help of God through Jesus to get it back. There are several passages that speak to the idea that we are still feeling the effects of that loss. One of those passages is in Romans chapter 8, like Kieran referenced earlier. You read that with me. Romans chapter 8. If we have enough time. I'm running dangerously low. Romans chapter 8 speaks to that. Romans 8, verses 18 through 23. Paul says, "For I consider the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is going to be revealed to us. For the creation eagerly waits with anticipation for God's sons to be revealed. For creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will also be set free from the bondage to decay into the glorious freedom of God's children. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together with labor pains until now. Not only that, but we ourselves, who have the Spirit as the first fruits, we also groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for adoption, the redemption of our bodies." And so we understand that this creation has been subjected to futility, and not just the creation, but we ourselves, we groan, waiting for that day when we are able to reclaim what we lost in the Garden of Eden. You might also plug in Ecclesiastes 3:11, right? God has set eternity in their heart, because nothing in this world makes sense without that God factor. We all have a hole in our heart that we're living with. Now, there are two practical explanations, two practical applications to the idea that we've lost something in the Garden of Eden. And every single person feels that loss and is looking to regain what they've lost. And I gave myself 5 minutes. 5 minutes to do it, and I think I can. I wonder, you think about the original audience, right? The Israelites wandering in the wilderness. And they learn about this story of loss and how the only way to get this loss back is to reclaim that relationship with God and Jesus and the Spirit. What do you think they're supposed to learn from this story? Why has this been kept alive for them? And I think one of the things that they ought to learn from this is that they need to remember that no matter where they are, no matter what land they conquer, no matter what land they inhabit, they need to remember that they should never feel comfortable here. They should never feel like this is where they're supposed to belong. So put yourselves in the shoes of those Israelites when they're reading these stories for the first time. Where have they come from? Coming out of Egypt, and probably, because they haven't conquered the land yet, that happens in Joshua, where are they? They're wandering in the wilderness. So where are they going? They're going to the Promised Land. And what might they be tempted to think as they're wandering through all the hardships in the wilderness and they look forward to the Promised Land, the land that's flowing with milk and honey? What might they be tempted to think? Yeah, that's rest, right? Once we get there, we're going to have everything that we've ever wanted. Don't you think they'd be tempted to think that? Maybe they thought that the land of Canaan was the promised rest that God was going to give His people. And maybe they thought once they got there, they were finally going to feel satisfied. That thing that they felt like they lost, that hole in their heart was no longer going to be there. They were going to have everything that they'd ever wanted. And that emptiness was going to be fulfilled. And they needed to make sure they remembered that there is another rest. A better rest that's waiting. Not Canaan land, but something even better than that, waiting just beyond. And I wonder if we ever fall prey to that same temptation. To feeling in our hearts that some physical thing that I get on this earth, that's what's going to make me whole, and that's what's going to fill what's missing, what's empty in my heart. I wonder if sometimes we think, look, I'm unsatisfied right now, I'm not filled up, there's something missing, but once I get married, then I'll be satisfied. Or, I'm not happy with my job, I'm married, I want to provide for my family. Once I get that job that really fulfills me or really pays me the way I deserve to be paid, then I'm really going to have what I'm looking for. Once I get that perfect house, once I get that plot of land, once I'm finally able to have children, that hole in my heart's going to be gone. And we are falling for the same temptation that they're falling for. We're thinking that some physical thing in a broken world is going to fill the spiritual hole that's in our hearts. They need to remember, we need to remember, that nothing is going to fill that hole until we are at home with God. They need to remember to never think they found rest or will find rest while they live here on this earth. And we need to remember that as well. Anyone have any comments or questions about that? I either confused you or did my job. I think a second, even more applicable thing is to recognize that we need to remember that we've lost something, and every person has lost something when we speak to others. We need to remember when we engage in evangelism that we have a divine cheat sheet. That even if they never say anything to us, and even if they look really happy, and even if they seem like they have an awesome life and have everything they possibly could want, we need to remember that we have secret insight into the human soul, because this is true of everyone's soul. That everyone's missing something. Everybody's looking to fill up that hole. And nothing on earth really is ever going to work. We need to remember that when we talk to other people. That's what Jesus does. That's the insight that he uses when he talks to the woman at the well in John 4. He's got that living water that's really going to quench the thirst. She's been trying to plug those holes in her life with husband after husband after husband after husband, and Jesus knows that. Jesus knows that the only thing that's really going to fill that hole is a relationship with God. And so we can use that when we discuss evangelism with others as well. They have a hole in their heart, whether you see it or not. And the only thing that's going to fill it is the gospel that you know and you can share with them. All right, wait. Next class, assigned reading. Genesis 4 through 5 and their genealogies, okay? So you can skim them and pretend like you read them. See you guys on Sunday.